this situation is developing very quickly. By the time this video goes out, there's probably going to be like some new news article that changes everything for the better or for the worse. But as of 9:40 a.m. Pacific time, the 24th of January, 2022, here's what we have, okay? For the past few months, Russia has been engaging in a campaign of military pressure on Ukraine, a former constituent of the USSR. They have been massing troops at the border to Ukraine, and in addition, they have moved troops into Belarus, a Russian ally, which is just north of Ukraine. The default position here is Russia bad, and that is justified by them being the fucking invader, okay? If they didn't want that bias to be held against them, then they shouldn't have waged a decades-long propaganda campaign up to it leading to a conflict in which they will no doubt try to immediately silence the ability for their, for their victims to cry out to the world. I'm telling you, we're going to get a bombard of propaganda, both from Russia-aligned sources, and from people in the West who, for personal or political reasons, have a bias towards Russia and Russian propaganda. So that'll be really fun to deal with. Also, honestly, not feeling good about this one, guys. I don't know. Not my top 2022 vibes. So we'll see. That one Twitter account who said that Russia was prompted to invade in winter, like early 2022. It's probably feeling pretty smart right now. I saw there were a bunch of people making fun of them back in like November when they made that big Twitter thread. But yeah, because just yesterday they were like, well, seems like everyone else is on board with me now. You know, like, all right, well, all right, you live your moment. As we all know, right now, Russia has massed troops not just along their border to Ukraine, but also along Belarus's border. They have the, as it's known in the real-time strategy community, the surround on Ukraine, which is not good if you're Ukraine. So we can very simplistically divide Ukraine into two basic blocks with regards to Russian influence. So we have Western Ukraine and Eastern Ukraine. Now, again, I'm speaking very simplistically here. Eastern Ukraine would be much, much, much easier for Russia to conquer than Western Ukraine, for a couple of reasons. First of all, Eastern Ukraine is much flatter, which means that it's harder territory to defend against Russia's vastly superior military, both numerically and technologically. Whereas West Ukraine is more mountainous, which, as we learned in Afghanistan, is very difficult terrain for us to deal with insurgents in. And it would be difficult terrain for Russia to deal with as well, because Russia also went to Afghanistan, and they also sucked shit there. So, yeah, this easier to hold than this for Russia. Additionally, Russia has spent a long period of time now funding dissident movements within East Ukraine. East Ukraine is full of insurgents and rebel groups that are either paid by or sympathetic to Russia, who have been stirring the pot for a while now. That makes East Ukraine a more likely target than West Ukraine in terms of holding and seizure. It is my feeling, though I don't know this for sure, but it is my feeling that if Russia were to overextend and attempt to conquer the entirety of Ukraine, this would bankrupt their empire. That would be very, very bad for them. Everything that I've heard from all sides of the table has suggested that that would be very, very, very bad for them. Holding territory is not easy. It's very difficult to do. West Ukraine is full of, let's say, people antagonistic to Ukraine's interests. To Russia's interests. It seems very difficult. Now, for your mountain point, here's a topography map. Thank you very much. Yeah, here you go. Let me get the topography map up right here. Here we go. As you can see, West Ukraine is generally a lot more mountainous. Additionally, they'd have to cross the river, this very large river. Again, it really doesn't even look like a river to me. It just looks like a very long series of lakes that just kind of share a direction of flow. But yeah, no, it's a river, and they'd have to cross that, and that would suck. Of course, they have troops in Belarus as well, so they could move south from there. But again, mountains. I'm not a military strategist. I will not pretend to have, concrete info on any of this. That's the impression that I've been given, listening to other people, both in the emails that I've gotten and also just general analysis from people who claim to be experts, but it's the internet, and really, who knows? It seems likely to me that East Ukraine would be easier to conquer and hold than West Ukraine. From everything that I've seen, it also seems like NATO and the United States would not enter Ukraine's borders. I do not think that they would be willing to travel and directly engage Russian forces. They would stay at the border to Poland, nearby countries. They would observe. I am still very worried if that happens, if the worst case scenario happens, of there being some kind of spillover, of there being poor trigger discipline, a miscommunication, a twitchy soldier on 18 hours of no sleep, instigating violence at a border between Russian and NATO forces if Russia made it over that far west. If they did, that could be very, 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 very bad. All you have to do is take a look cursorily at the history of the Cold War to find that we have had plenty of close calls with regards to the Cold War and direct engagement between Western and USSR forces. That would be very bad. Hopefully that does not happen. In terms of how to best address this threat, Russia has absolutely no right to the invasion that they are currently threatening. Anybody who says that they have a right is lying to you. There are people who will claim that Russia is acting defensively or that this is in response to broken treaties, which is wrong on a couple of accords. First of all, and I'll engage in the entirety of the nuance here because some people seem to want me to explain more. Russia claims that NATO moving eastward is a threat which they have a right to respond to with what they're doing right now with Ukraine. Now, here are some true things, okay? There is no official treaty signed which prevents NATO from moving eastward. There were temporary provisions made which prevented NATO from moving eastward during the time that East Germany was made whole again. But in terms of general behavior of NATO, NATO is not restricted from moving eastward. Additionally, NATO has moved eastward from its initial Cold War locations like 30 years ago. It did this like 30 years ago. Boris Yeltsin acknowledged the movement of NATO without like threatening invasion of Ukraine. And additionally, even if there was a treaty on the books which said NATO cannot move eastward, how is an appropriate response to a broken treaty with NATO to then invade Ukraine? No, this is disgusting. This is apologia. You can't say, hey, he's not Hitler, and then make the annexation arguments.
Which, it's not a good thing that he's going to do that, but he's going to do that. And then you just have to hope that Joe Biden is as reasonable as Barack Obama was, and you don't start a war. And
they're starting the war, Kyle. Also, Biden is already not committing troops to Ukraine.
Tweaks play a larger role in changing people's attitudes about certain things. Neoliberals are out here being like, we're applying lethal aid to Ukraine. That's sick, man. Okay. That's fucking sick. That's really...
Yes, lethal aid is a euphemism that people use because they think it sounds better than weapons, though I personally think that lethal aid sounds scarier. Lethal aid sounds like you're giving somebody a fucking lethal injection. To me, that's what I think of when I think lethal aid. That's my intuitive response. So I think weapons actually sounds a lot better, but...
Cool, it's really tight. Every single person is going buck wild on the Ukraine stuff. Every single person is. Like, it just popped the fuck off. So it's acceptable for Vladimir Putin to invade Ukraine. It's not, right? So the Russian border live in fear of Putin invasion. U.S. evacuating diplomats from the Ukraine embassy. And it's like, okay, that's... First of all, it's not acceptable for Vladimir Putin to invade Ukraine. It's not, right?
Oh, thank God. If we end the video right here, we avoid trouble in the future, right? If we end it right here.
I just make no mistake. I do not believe that it is an appropriate thing for Vladimir Putin to do. So let me just get that out of the way. So
we can still end it. There's still time.
That people do not misunderstand my position. Having said that, however, the reasoning as to why there is more troop activity at the fucking Ukrainian border on the Russian side specifically is because we keep fucking juicing the Ukrainians. And we're like, we're going to put you in NATO. What is this? I thought the NATO was the Western alliance, like the Western Hemisphere alliance. And now it's like Ukraine is also a part of the West. What's not a part of the West, motherfucker? Everyone is just an express.
This is just categorically untrue. The Russian buildup is for invasion and posturing. This is not a defensive buildup. If it was there's a huge difference between defensive and offensive buildup. First of all, NATO was a defensive pact. NATO wasn't going to fucking invade Russia. The idea that this is some kind of defensive posturing is just not true. Additionally, Ukraine is not in like nothing caused Russia to amass these troops, except for Russia deciding to amass these troops. Hasan heard your statement and called you a liberal on stream. Good. I'm liberally fucking his dad. What do you want? His uncle? There, that's well known.
Anti-USSR, anti-communist fucking organization is now adding additional, adding Ukraine into the fucking fold. Why the fuck would Russia ever want that? Like, why would they want that? Can you imagine a world in which, like, I don't know, the Chinese government was like, we are going to turn Canada into a military base, okay? We're going to turn Canada and...
If America was constantly militarily threatening Canada and Canada, like, tried to appeal to join membership for some kind of defensive pact, so that if we invaded Canada, we would also, like, trigger retaliatory offenses from other countries, like, I couldn't really blame them. Like, the issue is, a lot of this shit, the only reason NATO is still relevant is because people are still afraid of Russia. If Russia didn't keep fucking invading their neighbors, like, holy shit, man. Annexation of Crimea, invasion of Georgia, postured invasion of Ukraine, like, they do this a lot. They do this a lot, man. It's pretty bad.
In Mexico into forward operating bases,
Chechnya as
our
well,
endless effort to stop the capitalist rot coming out of Western imperialist forces. Western imperialism is a serious problem.
What?
Now we're gonna fucking put bases in Canada and we're gonna put bases in Mexico. People are saying Cuba. Yeah, that's a great example. What happened with the Cuban Missile Crisis?
No, nuclear missiles were a problem in Cuba because they were being put there for offensive first strike capabilities. Nuclear weapons are used to attack. No, Ukraine joining NATO is not going to turn Ukraine into an offensive front for Russia. Russia's a nuclear power. If there was any war with Russia, it would end in the world would end with it. There's a difference. There's a difference between those things.
Bad answers are trying to fucking put Ukraine.
He nearly said force, by the way. I think Ukraine wants to be in NATO. We're not taking the NATO hat and, like, shoving it on top of their heads. They want to be in NATO.
Into NATO, an organization designed specifically to say fuck you to the USSR, fuck you to communism, international communism, an organization that is...
Actually, the organization is a shared defensive pact so that if any of them ever subject invasion, other countries will retaliate with offensive pacts. It is a defensive organization. I can understand why Ukraine might be interested in such a thing right now.
Still being utilized to enact Western imperialism, like taking a fucking neighbor of...
Everything uses West...
A country that we've declared a foreign adversary and, like, adding them onto the let's fuck this country organization is obviously a fucking threat. Like that.
Yes, Vaush, a defensive pact against the Soviets? Yeah, no shit. Why do people think it's a gotcha? Yeah, dude, NATO is anti-Russia. And? I'm anti-Russia. Fuck you. Good. I don't care.
That's crazy to assume that that is not, that's not a threatening action against this other nation. I feel like there's a...
Well, then maybe they shouldn't threaten their neighboring countries to the point where they feel like they would rather turn to aid from fucking NATO.
Think difference between capitalist American aggression in Iraq and just defending an autonomous country against imperialism. Just because the USA is also imperialistic doesn't mean we shouldn't also fight against Russian imperialism. Just having a discussion, please don't drag me.
This chatter's right. I don't think the US should put troops in Ukraine for fairly evident reasons, but
I'm not dragging you, but we are utilizing the situation in Ukraine, which is an honorable and just situation from the Ukrainian perspective, to continue doing additional Western imperialism, to keep beefing up the ranks of NATO, to keep increasing.
No, that's what Ukraine wants. You can't say that America is taking advantage of the noble Ukrainian cause when Ukraine wants the weapons and wants NATO membership. You can't be like, oh, I'm not, like, dismissing the desires of the Ukrainian people. I'm just chastising the West for their imperialism by trying to force NATO onto Ukraine and give them... Well, that's what Ukraine wants.
The legitimacy of NATO, which is a organization designed with the express purpose of defeating communism all around the fucking world, okay? And defeating Russia. Well, not Russia, the USSR, which has been defeated. They succeeded. Okay? Every single time I get involved in foreign policy takes, it turns into something that is, like, significantly just awful. Everyone always has a deep understanding of racism or whatever. They're, like, very progressive on every other issue. But when it comes to anti-imperialist takes...
You aren't giving the anti-imperialist takes, man. That's why. Why are there so many lefties who are progressive and then on foreign policy issues they just crumple? You're not anti-imperialist when you're saying... like, yeah, dude, like, whatever, just fucking let Russia invade Ukraine. That's not the anti-imperialist take. You can't pretend to sympathize with the struggle of Ukrainians when you are saying that the things that they want to defend themselves are actually just some cynical power ploy from the West. You can't do both those things. So if they cross that line, then that's the line that we drew.
So your line is what I said before too, just the NATO countries basically. As soon as he goes into the NATO countries, all bets are off.
But you want to retreat NATO. You want to give him an extra dozen countries to play with before running up against our borders. I think we should expand NATO. I want Russia to be NATO. I don't know. Why not? Fuck them.
I genuinely, honestly, Vaush, after having this conversation, I don't know where I would draw the line. And I don't know. Look, it's possible that doing some of the concessions and some of the things that Russia says they want, it's possible if we agree to it, that it genuinely would squash the beef. I truly believe that. I know you don't believe that. I truly believe that. But it's also possible it doesn't. And if it doesn't, then yeah, you look kind of fucking stupid if you pull NATO back to where it was in, say, 1992.
And
what's that?
It's not a spite thing, and neither of us can see the future. I'm interested in your perspective on this. We agree on a lot. We don't run in perfectly identical circles. There are people who are running around right now, completely justifying everything Russia does. Ukrainian aggression must be blah, blah, blah. The language that you used trended close to that at some points. Ukraine being a fake state, though I think I know what you meant when you said that, like a post-Soviet Union, immediate, line in the sand.
The borders were drawn in the 1990s. That's what I mean.
I think it existed as a product of the USSR, but were the borders changed after the Soviet Union fell, or?
I don't know. All I know is the borders were drawn in the early 1990s, and obviously part of it is ethnic Ukrainians, and then part of it is more ethnic Russians. That's all I meant by that.
Borders are all artificial, of course. I'm just not much of an isolationist. When people dying in Ukraine are people dying home. Home is Earth. I worry. Obviously, nuclear war must be averted, but I think we have to approach this situation with an attitude of unimaginable contempt towards Russia, because the most charitable interpretation of what's taking place, even from your perspective, is they are manufacturing a justification for invasion based on false concerns over NATO aggression on Russia's border.
I think both actors, the West and Russia, I think they both think they're acting defensively, when in reality, to differing degrees, they're both actually acting offensively.
But Ukraine is literally acting defensively.
No, I understand that, but I'm not even just talking about Ukraine. I'm talking about everything post-Soviet Union breakup from then all the way until now, both what Russia did in Georgia and Ukraine and Crimea, and what the U.S. did with further NATO expansion. I think that every step of the way, on the side of the U.S. and Russia, they genuinely thought we are acting defensively, but in reality, both sides were actually acting offensively. And so, you can see how we got to this terrible point, because if everybody's, and you brought this up earlier, it's like, that is the go-to move of authoritarians. That is the go-to move of imperialists, is like you scream and you play the victim as you actually act offensively and aggressively. And I think there's been a lot of that happening on both sides of this to different degrees.
Do that though. NATO, the countries that are in NATO.
I'm talking about with the NATO I'm not saying they're perfectly analogous. I'm just saying that there are differing degrees here. But yeah, NATO expansion towards Russia's border was in effect something that the U.S. thought was defensive, and perhaps NATO thought it was defensive, but it is offensive. It's like they want to make sure that Russia doesn't have their sphere of influence, and they wanted to go back and, rehash the Cold War arguments. It's similar to like the Treaty of Versailles after World War II, where it was very punitive towards Germany.
I don't like the equivacy here. Because, first of all, the Treaty of Versailles happened to Germany, whereas NATO expansion is happening to sovereign nations that request to be part of NATO. So by implying that the Treaty of Versailles, which was a punitive, attack on Germany, is comparable to sovereign nations Russia claims holdover, choosing to be with NATO suggests to me I don't like this equivacy. Obviously, Russia and America are both acting in their geopolitical interests, but the difference is the countries that are in NATO want NATO there. Obviously, there are some complexities historically, but in terms of, Estonia, Latvia, what have you, Ukraine now, Poland, these countries want us there. What Russia does, they're also acting in their geopolitical interest, but that's what all countries are doing all the time. The difference is we do it because our superior economic bloc and our relative stability affords them protection and economic resources, and Russia just invades countries that are weaker than it. Don't think there's any amount of context that would make this not sociopathic. Is that a challenge? Let's find out. Actual geopolitical threats will change anything. I feel like the only thing we can do at this point is starve Russia out. We're wealthier than them by metrics. I mean, ally with all the countries in their periphery, sanction their leaders, cripple their economy, wait for them to bleed out, and then when they're ready to play ball, they can be a nice, compliant country.
I mean, but there's a lot of civilians that get hurt in that scenario.
In eastern Ukraine as well, yeah. But if they're going to be like
sanctions
that,
on Russia is what I'm saying. That would hurt a lot of civilians.
Yeah, I know. Not as much as their missile strikes would hurt eastern Ukrainians, right? Again, keep in mind, this isn't out of spite. If actual... Got the mid-sentence cut off there. Very good. Anyway, I like how the mid-sentence cut off prevents the context from making it evident that it would be sort of an anti-war thing. But anyway, brilliant clip right there. So the issue here is that geopolitics is really tough. You know what I mean? One of the reasons why I like domestic sociological stuff is because sometimes there are empirical answers because people behave predictably as groups given certain conditions. So, for example, if I make statements about how reducing income inequality would lead to less crime, or if I talk about how urban renewal or city revitalization can do this or that, I'm talking about like a really consistent through line that you can find basically objective evidence to prove. Sociology is not as much of a soft science as people like to say. You can figure out a lot. The problem with geopolitics is that it's a whole other ball game. You can sincerely believe the best way to prevent a bad thing from happening is to do this thing, but then it turns out that like just the other thing was the right thing. Like, oops, there's so much information you're not privy to because a lot of it is literally an issue of national security. So we as civilians are just like sitting here like dumb fish, like just taking guesses, it can make it really, really, really difficult to fully understand the matter at hand. But when it comes to this particular situation, let me remind you all of the circumstances, right? Shall we? So the issue at hand here is that Russia seems to be gearing up to, though they're taking their sweet time, maybe they will pull back, seems to be gearing up to invade Ukraine, which would be bad. The reason they say they're invading Ukraine is because it's a prompt in response to NATO expansionism, and they take an issue with NATO expansionism because NATO is basically an anti-Russia defensive alliance that's been expanding eastward through previously Soviet Union-controlled territories. And if they were to take control of Ukraine, they would literally share a border with Russia, which Russia doesn't want because A, that means weakening geopolitical control over their, periphery. And B, it means these are countries they can't with as much. As you've probably seen in Georgia or, the Czech Republic back in the early 2000s. Yeah. And Crimea, Russia sometimes likes to go what I like to call a gamer mode on their neighbors. Chechnya, thank you. They like to go gamer mode on their neighbors. It's very difficult to do that if there are NATO troops in that area, because if there are NATO troops there and you go gamer mode, World War III starts. So, yeah. They want to prevent NATO from moving in, and posturing and invasion are tools on the table for engaging in that behavior. Also, as people in my subreddit have pointed out, there are strategic resources such as natural gas in East Ukraine that Russia wants its hands on because having control of that would deny the West the ability to leverage it against them. There are a ton of complicated factors here, but the gist of it is, it seems like Russia is just going to keep bullying their neighbors unless those neighbors are protected in some way.
I'm talking about the United States sending arms to Ukraine.
Is there any term I can search? Anything I can look up?
After Ukraine, yeah, Ukraine has received several batches of U.S. weapons.
I'm aware of that. What about, you're saying we sent them weapons to support military action against this leader? Can you give me
No, listen. After those elements actually overthrew the government, after he had to actually flee to Moscow, the United States stepped up arming of the Ukraine.
So you were lying. You were lying.
I'm not lying.
You explicitly said we gave them arms to overthrow their president. What, we did it after?
I'm saying the government was overthrown illegally, right? And the US
I don't care. Wait, law? What are you, a fucking liberal? Jesus Christ!
What?
Law! Law!
All right, Vaush.
Where? What armaments?
The U.S. has armed Ukraine.
No shit! Good! I hope we give them nukes. They shouldn't have taken them away. I don't care. You said you were comparing Russia funding tens of thousands of paramilitary troops in East Ukraine to the overthrow of this, and now it turns out all we did was support the protesters? You're comparing funding paramilitary groups to supporting the protesters?
No, I'm saying
you did. You explicitly did that. You're not gaslighting me for an 87th time. Chat!
Jesus Christ.
Did he not explicitly do that multiple times as I dug my way through all this information, only now to arrive invariably at the fact that no, that didn't happen. You could at least have the decency to lie about it.
All right.
Shut up! I hung up. Holy shit! Jesus Christ, the gaslighting. Oh my fucking God. Jesus Christ, thank God I have high self-esteem. Oh my God, what a piece of shit. I don't know if this is just floundering or whatever, but holy fucking Christ. Jesus. He's lying about Ukraine. Like, guys, I'm fully aware that, like, everything he said was either a lie or misrepresented. But, like, looking through this, like, well, okay, well, did we? Because I was thinking, like, well, that doesn't seem right. At first, the claim was we funded far-right Nazi groups in Ukraine to overthrow their leader. And then it was we funded their protesters, some of which went to far-right groups who were on their side, and then they overthrew the government. And then it turned into, well, actually, like, they just overthrew their government, and, like, we like, supported them. We, like... Yeah, illegally? God. Yes, Max Blumenthal is cited in this article. That's great. That's cool. Line go up. Woo! Hey, are the liberals in my community happy now? Guys, look, the line is going up. Are you happy now? This is what you wanted, right? It's possible that the war doesn't happen, but holy shit. To me, at this point, it seems infinitely more likely that it does than it doesn't. So much more likely. I understand that Hasan is really, really bad at changing his mind and really, really bad at taking criticism, but holy shit, okay? He's got two roads to take if Russia does invade. One of them is the one where he just kind of accepts it and moves on, like accepts that he made a mistake. And one of it is the one where he essentially justifies Russia's invasion by saying that US brinksmanship and NATO brinksmanship brought it about, and that, like, the only reason, basically he buys whatever false flag bullshit Russian propaganda they put out there, and he's like, well, it wouldn't have happened if it weren't for this thing Russia said the West did or whatever. And I really hope it's the former.
20 years later, British troops have finally left Afghanistan with all the thousands dead and the...
Okay, this is true, but I have no idea what this has to do with Ukraine. No clue whatsoever.
Terrible plight of the hunger of the people of Afghanistan at the present time. That was a war that was goaded into by the world's media and by the idea that the only solution to a problem is to send the troops in and bomb. But I think people should just think a little bit before they say anything about that.
But nobody's...
And then later, our opposition to the Iraq war, we were similarly condemned as being pro-Saddam Hussein. I just have to say on the record, I was one of a very, very small number of members of parliament. You could count them on the fingers of one hand who opposed British arms sales to Iraq in the 1980s because we were not supporters of that regime. By not supporting a regime, it doesn't mean you want to go to war with them. It means you want to bring about peace for the people of that area and those people. And so this event this evening is to ask people to think a bit more carefully about the situation facing us at the present time, and obviously facing the people of Ukraine and the people of Russia. And
oh man, these are not equivalent. Ukraine is a sovereign government that requested armed aid. This isn't like us funding like the Mujahideen to fight against Afghanistan. Ukraine is its own country. It's an allied country that's going to be invaded. Who cares if we give them weapons? They're not going to be used offensively against Russia. I've been waiting for all the information to coalesce, and all the information that I need seems to be present. Okay. War crimes are currently being committed in the Donbas region of Ukraine, East Ukraine, the portion of Ukraine that has been, for the past 8 years, more or less completely controlled by Russian-backed separatist groups. So, 2 days ago, Russia alleged a planned genocide by Ukraine against the people in that region was to be committed. They alleged this without evidence. The claims to that point have been debunked, and were immediately so, but that doesn't stop them from making them. And in response, the separatist groups in East Ukraine claimed that they were going to evacuate civilians to Russia, to the tune of hundreds of thousands of people. Following, Russia claims there's going to be a genocide in the Donbas region, which I'm going to be referring to, East Ukraine, and Russian-backed separatists, who, while not legally agents of Russia, are nonetheless directly beholden to Russia, say they're going to evacuate civilians to Russia, a thing which I must insist you cannot do without Russian government permission. If the Russian separatists were not acting directly in accordance with Russia, they would not be able to just escort hundreds of thousands of troops across the border of two feuding countries. There's obviously a degree of coordination going on over there.
The bottom line, though, is it seems like, what does the Biden administration do? Presumably, they don't want a war. Although there's a lot of people out there that feels like they do. But I don't know. What's your sense of the Biden administration? Like, I can't see how they think this is good under their watch, as it were.
Yeah, it's really disturbing because it seems like, okay, so things are, heating up again now, between these like Russian-backed separatist factions and, the Ukrainian government, which I guess it's also worth saying, like, one thing that complicates all of this is that the without making excuses for like Russia's like regional mini imperialism, it is also the case that like the Ukrainian government that exists now, even though they did have a real election since then and all this, like, is a successor to a, depending on your point of view, revolution or coup that overthrew a Russian aligned and very corrupt but also democratically elected government.
How is this even remotely relevant to the... so this is what I don't get. Like, everyone wants to bring this up. What does that have to do with what's happening right now? What relationship does this have to the logistical question right now of like pretext for invasion, its likelihood and justification? Like, what?
And that includes like lots of fighting that's being done against the separatists by like very strange like far right kind of groups in the Ukraine, right? So
both sides field far right militias. It's not. It's this narrative. It's the Russian narrative that that the Ukrainian government is like controlled by Nazis and they field Nazis, and and the Russian government totally doesn't field far right groups. This is literally he was no angel in Ukraine. Like, okay, so before we talk about like the invasion of Ukraine, like, they're not like great, their history is like not great, like, I just think this narrative that they're super nice is like, like, why are we doing this? War seems imminent. Okay, the basic situation right now is that following a period of time during which the Donbas region in East Ukraine has been subject to significant tension between the Ukrainian armed forces and the Russian secessionists who are directly backed, funded by, and respond to the Russian government, we have had a development. The development, namely, is that the Donbas region has declared essentially independence, which, if you remember from the U.S. Civil War, is actually not a thing that you can just do. It's a little more complicated than that. Russia immediately recognized the declared independence and has signed a military treaty with the Donbass region as an independent region. Essentially, this would mean that if Russia were to claim that aggression between the, in their mind, seceded Donbass region and Ukraine continued, that their intervention would be to defend a military ally. They're essentially fabricating a sort of legal technicality by which what they're doing isn't invasion, but rather supporting the defensive alliance of an ally. Understand that in times such as these, there is quite possibly nothing more pro-imperialist, nothing more anti-socialist than to sacrifice the working people of Ukraine, who have in this instance done nothing wrong, to the military ambitions of an imperialist power. There is no left-leaning argument in favor of Russia's behavior here. There is none.
Feeling bad about the Crimean annexation does not change the reality of the Crimean annexation being a completely justifiable fucking act by the Russian government, okay? So that's it. That's fine. And Hitler invaded countries based on Germanic ties at first? Yeah, dude. Talk to me when he's fucking throwing Ukrainians in a fucking... What are you talking about? Talk to me when he's throwing Ukrainians at a concentration camp, okay?
I guess that's the line now. Up until the concentration camps were constructed, you know, it was like Hasan watching Adolf Hitler in Germany and the rest of Europe shortly thereafter, and he's like, okay, but do we have evidence of the camps yet?
Okay, Hitler wasn't fucking bad because he decided to invade Austria. He was...
I think that was bad. I do hot take.
He was bad because he was fucking killing Jews. Okay, that was the problem.
What if both
he
are
wasn't
bad?
like he wasn't like, oh yeah, we're gonna fucking annex territory with like Germanic people in it. That wasn't the main problem with Hitler. I think that was like maybe 8th down the line.
Okay. If it was 8th down the line, wouldn't that still make it one of the problems? Like, he did a lot of bad things. If it was the 8th most bad thing, wouldn't that still be a bad thing? That's in the top 10.
Kenya and almost every African country was birthed by the ending of empire. Our borders were not of our own drawing.
Oh, shit.
They were drawn in the distant colonial metropoles of London, Paris, and Lisbon, with no regard for the ancient nations that they cleaved apart. Today, across the border of every single African country live our countrymen with whom we share deep historical, cultural, and linguistic bonds. At independence, had we chosen to pursue states on the basis of ethnic, racial, or religious homogeneity, we would still be waging bloody wars these many decades later. Instead, we agreed that we would settle for the borders that we inherited, but we would still pursue continental political, economic, and legal integration. Rather than form nations that looked ever backwards into history with a dangerous nostalgia, we chose to look forward to a greatness none of our many nations and peoples had ever known.
I'm being torn up inside, dude. I'm being annihilated. They are legitimately engaging with this issue with a level of nuance that I am not seeing from any other online leftist. I don't agree with everything that they're saying, but they're actually engaging with reality and actually responding to it. This is fucking devastating for me. I need to, like, I can't deal with this, man. I can't. Chill on head, if you fucking start with me, I swear to God. I'm in the goddamn Twilight Zone. I know, prisoner. Oh, God. I can't do this. This is too much, man. This is too much. Guys, how are we supposed to win any political battles when this is the shit we're dealing with? The online left is so dysfunctional that people who talk like Caleb Maupin are capable of commanding a significant amount of, like, political attention and drive a ton of, like, political discourse. I don't understand. Can't do shit in this political climate. I don't get it, man. Like, we will never... The Russian government is opposed to the spread of leftist values worldwide. They support far-right movements the world around. They do not support far-left movements. Or when they do support far left movements, they're the kind of far left where they're, you know, force the vote type Jimmy Dore whatevers. Not real, actual left-leaning advocacy. There are so many Russian apologists in the far left. So there are basically three directions that this can take, okay? The first one is the hopelessly optimistic one, where Russia realizes they're in over their head and they pull back. This is ridiculous. This would be a ridiculous, ridiculous level of hopium, unfathomable almost. The idea that this government would do that. No, I don't think so. Barely even worth discussing. But it's not impossible. So there you go. The second possibility, the one that I think is most likely, is that Russia is going to continue this war of incredible aggression with more and more prolonged anti-civilian bombing runs, going to try and occupy as much territory as possible and bleed his empire dry in the process. The third option is the one which actually works out in favor of Russia, one which is still not tremendously to their favor, but they do succeed in effectively pacifying the region. My guess is that the second option is most likely by far. This is going to be a horrendously destructive conflict, and I feel as though there's very little we can do right now, except as people who are presumably in the West. I know some Ukrainians are watching right now. I am not Ukrainian, tragically. You know, Ukrainian in spirit, Polish, Irish in blood. As people who are watching, the best thing we can do is attempt to facilitate a positive political environment for the support of Ukrainian people. So that is what we need to focus on. Look, all I'm going to say is this, okay? There is no room in the left for people who hold water for a fascist, far-right, ethno-nationalist government. And by the way, as far as I'm concerned, invoking blood and soil as a pretext for invasion is a form of ethno-nationalism. So told because it is, I don't know what else I can say. It's literally ethno-nationalism. Both of the terms of that word there are very squarely, you're using ethnicity as a determining force for not just imperialist action, but the authenticity of national inclusion. And if you don't think that a full Russian program, a full reconquest of the borderlines of the previous empire wouldn't include the ethnic oppression of groups they didn't like as much, then you're a fucking fool, because Stalin did that shit too. And so did Lenin. Look, authoritarianism is bad, okay, guys? Just capping this off, all right? I've said this in the past before about Bernie or bust, but this issue is much more severe to me, okay? I now, with all the power vested in me, okay, I condemn to an internal blight everyone in the online left who is wrong on this and who does not see the ways, the error of their ways, okay? An eternal blight upon all of them, all right? May they rot. I will not work with these people. Because the economic and political consequences of prolonged conflict are ruinous for Russia. And they have so far been ruinous for Russia. And Ukraine, both its armed forces and its civilians, have given every indication that they will continue to be ruinous for Russia. And that, I think, is glorious. And I, again, am sincerely impressed. I believe at this moment, at least per my guesses, my uninformed guesses, Ukraine has exceeded my estimation of what was possible in the opening days of a war against a vastly superior military force that has them surrounded almost literally from every direction. Keep the morale game up, okay? Be optimistic. Celebrate every landing cruiser that's downed, every Russian helicopter that gets atomized in the sky, every Javelin missile that turns a T-72 tank into a flaming heap of metal. Celebrate all of these things, not because you value the violence, but because you value the effectiveness with which the Ukrainian people are protecting themselves against the onslaught of fascism. And because, you know what? Frankly, to be perfectly forthcoming, I think they could use it too. I'm sure Ukrainian armed service personnel and Ukrainian citizens are like, they've got smartphones, you know, they're looking on. And it does warm my heart a little bit, the idea, you know, even if their city's getting bombed, the idea of them looking online and going, oh, okay, well, here's like 8 million people celebrating a Russian ship that got down, you know, or like a plane that got down. You know, here's them eulogizing and glorifying our war heroes. You know, here's them celebrating our victories, praising our anti-tank divisions, you know. I imagine that feels pretty good for them. And I imagine that helps keep the morale up. The war for Ukraine was a war of morale, okay? And Zelensky has, in a show not only of personal courage and valor, but of tactical brilliance, Zelensky has won the morale war in a manner which cannot be undone by the Russian government. There's nothing the Russian government can do to undo this. Zelensky choosing to stay and fight in the capital of Kyiv, even if he is killed, even if the capital city is taken, the Ukrainian people will never abide the continued presence of Russian soldiers. Never, 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 never. And with stuff like this happening as well, can you imagine? Lviv-based Pravda brewery switches to making Molotov cocktails. The Ukrainian army is handing out guns. Their breweries are making Molotov cocktails. There are posts all over social media of Ukrainian citizens in Kyiv just making as many Molotov cocktails as they can. They will never abide Russian occupation. The Ukraine is a threshing machine for Russian soldiers. They will meet naught but death there. And that is only the case because they have, at least to this point, maintained such exceptionally high morale. And I think a lot of that is due directly to Zelensky. I cannot fathom any other leader of a sovereign nation choosing to stay and fight in a besieged city. I cannot. Can you imagine? It's ridiculous to even think about. Can you imagine like Obama goes to Iraq? I mean, what? Like, it's silly. It's like a joke. It's something that someone would write in like a joke comic, you know, like, haha, wouldn't it be funny if life really was this stupid and narrative driven? Except it's happening. Absolutely obscene. In the best possible way. An obscene breach of reality. Narrativization leaks into the real world just a little bit here in Zelensky's bravery and in the bravery of the Ukrainian troops. I think, if anything, we are currently seeing the obsolescence of total war, at least between relatively developed countries, and I think that, if nothing else, is a beautiful thing. You see, as far as I can tell, right now, Russian logistics is dicked. There are reports of Russian tanks and armored convoys running out of gas on the road.
Сломались, пацаны.
This Ukrainian citizen just stops and asks them how they're doing and where they're going, and then, like, encourages them to leave. They're out of gas. Drive a little more down the road, and oh, what's that? What's that? No gas? No gas? No gas?
Сломались, пацаны.
No gas? It's wild, and there are reports everywhere of convoys stalling, of them trying to like buy gas off Ukrainian civilians and get food as well. Like, they weren't given enough rations, the Russian soldiers, which is incredible. Also, if you are driving an armored convoy, I legitimately do not think that there is any way you're ever going to find civilians with enough gas to trade with. I'm just guessing here, but I have a feeling that the gas, the amount of gas that a Ukrainian civilian might stock up during wartime would be enough to power a T-72 tank for about 3 minutes, given that cars are small and light, and tanks are massive and incredibly heavy. Let's hope that no nuclear war happens. Let's hope that Kyiv stands. Let's hope that the sanctions against Russia not only embitter the citizens of that country against Putin, but also the oligarchs within it, because that's where the real power lies. And you know what? Let's hope that if everything works out, if Russia loses, their soldiers pull back, Putin kills himself, we can only dream, all that settles out, I think the West should rebuild Russia. And I don't mean we send in companies to invest or whatever. I mean we just give them a fuck ton of money. Because the sanctions we're levying right now are against the behavior of Russia's government, not the behavior of their people. That is not a democracy. Their people are not responsible for what their leader is doing, not even close. If the problems we're meaning to push against are solved, our next step should be making sure the people of Russia do not suffer needlessly as a consequence of the person who ruled over them. They should not be made to do that. And I would be proud to see my tax dollars, and be proud to see the tax dollars of people in other aligned countries, being spent providing aid to Russia so that their citizenry does not need to needlessly suffer. Ukraine too, of course, but that goes without saying. Of course we're going to provide aid to Ukraine. That is going to happen, guaranteed, if Ukraine repels Russia. But citizens, innocent civilians shouldn't suffer anymore.